empathy training and talking about morale at times in the organization, and some of the common threads of concern were how people handle conflicts, how many conflicts there are, and overall communication strategies. So that's where the training came from. It's like I said, it's a fallout of the training we did back in July around empathy. So when I say the word conflict, what do you think of? What words come to mind?
Arguing, no resolve, not being able to come to an agreement.
Okay.
Or agree to disagree type
Like
thing.
a stalemate
Right.
kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Conflicts when you have issues to solve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And conflict is natural and necessary. How many people are comfortable with conflict?
Not many. That depends on what it is.
Yeah. Like if it were at home, it's different.
Yeah, of course.
At work, I feel like much better with it. I like it when the department health walks in. But at home, if bring home a bad report or something, it's different.
Different conflict.
Right, it's emotionally driven, I think.
Absolutely. What else do you think causes a difference with conflict for you personally between, say, home and work, or a supervisor or employee? Like, what do you think creates a different feeling for you when it comes to conflict?
Being able to express maybe what you're feeling, or not having somebody hear your side of, or being able to relay what you're, you're feeling. I think sometimes people get jostled up in they get angry, so they can't get out what they're really trying to relay, and so it just gets convoluted with all of that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So sometimes if the emotion is too high, it's hard for people to work through it.
Right.
And I mean, we all face conflictual situations all the time, right? Whether it's the person in front of you who's driving like an idiot, or it's the person, when you go to Walmart and there's, 100 people waiting to check out and there's 2 checkouts open, right? There's conflict everywhere. We certainly can't pick every battle. We can't fight every battle. Some people do, which I think is exhausting. What is the difference between a battle you might pick and a battle you might not pick on a daily basis? I mean, how many people would pick the Walmart conflict?
You can't control it, so why would you pick it?
Okay.
You're just going to put yourself into early, you'll be at the cardiologist earlier in life if you continue to do that.
Okay, so sometimes you can easily identify, I have no control over that. Okay. Does it also matter who the conflict's with?
Yeah, probably.
Right? I mean, if somebody upsets me at Walmart, I'm probably not going to confront them. But if my boyfriend upsets me, well, now we got a problem. Right? So the relationship piece matters, and the investment in the relationship matters. Why else do people not choose conflict, do you think?
Just avoidance.
Uncomfortable.
They don't want to deal with it, right?
Uncomfortable. It's absolutely uncomfortable. But without it, we can't get where we're going. And I think that's part of what the conversations have been with administration, is that part of getting us where they say they want us to go is going to require some conflict. It's going to require difficult conversations. Conversations people don't want to have. But it's the only way to get there. So whether or not you're comfortable with conflict is also going to be a factor in whether or not you choose a certain conflict. Okay. Do you think it also matters if you feel like it's going to do any good? I mean, you've all worked with people, whether they're your peers or your supervisors, where you feel like, I'm not gonna say anything to them because it's not gonna change anything.
Right. Feel like you're not being heard.
Mm-hmm. And from what I've been told, that's been some of the morale issue, is that people are having conflict with each other and they don't feel safe to have those conversations. Right, so that's part of what has to change from the top down, is for people to feel safe and comfortable to have those conversations. Because what are the risks? What if you have an issue with your supervisor and you go to them? What are the risks?
Worry about retaliation or bad evaluations or just uncomfortable work environment.
Absolutely.
You know, all of those things.
Absolutely. What's one of the things that you think makes conflict a lot worse in an agency, like an organization like this? Because we've already decided conflict's going to happen, whether there's 2 people in the organization or 2,000 people in the organization, there's going to be conflict. What do you think makes it worse?
But you have to see that person all the time?
If you have to see them all the time? Yep. And if there's a personality conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, okay, we have to keep working together?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. What else?
I think just the lack of the basic communication. You're not going to communicate. If you're not going to deal with the conflict, you're not going to communicate about the smaller things.
Okay, so people that
You
don't know
that's
how.
Correct. Like, you know.
And of course, gossip, right? I'd be willing to bet if I could do research on conflict that wouldn't occur if people would mind their own business. Honestly. For lots of reasons. One, because if I go to somebody because I have an issue with somebody, if that person says anything other than you should talk to that other person, well, now you have a third person involved. Right? So the response can often be, I hear what you're saying, but I think you should go right to them. We don't say that. We mostly say, well, what happened? Who said what? Did you tell so-and-so? Right? Human nature. We're all subject to being human. But I think we have to check ourselves. And that's part of what we talked about back in July. And a piece of this training is that self-awareness piece. Because I don't have any control over how you operate. Any more than you have any control over how I operate. But I do need to check in with myself, because if I'm having a bad day, I may not want to talk to anybody that I don't need to talk to. Just because if I'm not well that day, my ability to communicate is going to be off. But I need to know that. It's not your job to know how I'm feeling. Right? So it's that piece of staying aware of what's going on with you. And this time of year is a perfect example. How many people are so stressed with the holidays? Right? And if I stay up all night stressing about what I didn't buy and what I have to wrap and how much money I spent and who I forgot and this and that, I'm not going to come in ready to deal with people the same way I would if I were well rested and not stressed. Right? So I need to know that. We also talked back in July and August about human nature operating. Everybody on the planet operates the same way. Thoughts, feelings, behavior. What I'm thinking drives what I'm feeling, and what I'm feeling drives what I do. So if somebody says to you, you made me mad, it's not true. They might think that, and it might feel that way, but my emotions are driven by my thought pattern. So I need to stay aware of that, because if I'm going to confront somebody, that's probably not the way I want to start the conversation. I don't want to start the conversation with any you statements, first of all. And I definitely don't want to walk in blaming somebody for how I feel. Yes, people's behavior affects us. Absolutely. But nobody makes us feel anything. We create that ourselves. And it's a really important point to remember. Because that's often the first place we go, well, if you didn't do that, then I wouldn't feel this way. Perhaps, but there's a piece in there that I'm in charge of, which is my own thought pattern. So let's talk about resolving conflict. What are some things you think you need to stay aware of? If you've decided this relationship is important to me, we've worked together a long time, or this resident's care is really important to me, so I'm going to confront so-and-so, whatever you decide that makes it important enough to confront this person, what are some things you have to think about?
Just how you confront them. Your body language, the words you use, and you have to still validate their feelings as well, because if it's not going to be communication if you're doing all the talking.
Right.
You have to see where they're coming from, and I just think you have to approach it you can't be like, come at them or, those sort of things. If you want to have a meaningful conversation, you have to make sure that everybody's heard.
Absolutely. So that's one body language, or the finger pointing. What other body language issues do you think there are?
Eye rolling.
Absolutely.
Crossing your arms. Just even your posturing. Just,
And the neck thing.
Yeah, I can think of so many. Because if you come at somebody like that, your words might sound nice, but if your body's abrasive, they're going to pick up on it right away.
Absolutely.
Like you do not mean what you say. Yeah.
Tone of voice is big, and I always say to people, I'm just a loud person, so somebody might take that a certain way, and it's not even on my radar. Not because I'm intending that way, but I always blame it on being Italian and that we all yell. I just think that's what we do. I'm pretty sure everybody in my family yells for the most part. So I'm just not aware of that. But it's on me to stay aware of that. I can't be like, oh, sorry, I yell. Sorry you felt that way. No, that's not how that goes. Right? So that's on me to stay aware of. So tone of voice, words, right? The specific words we use that people may interpret differently. Right? There's certainly people all the time get upset with say, just give me a minute, I'll get right back to you. Now, is that ever a minute? But it could vary from 5 minutes to never happening. Right? So we have to stay aware in the conversation that we don't all interpret things the same way. So body language, eye rolling, I don't know what you call the neck thing, I just call it the neck thing. Posturing, also environment. The hallway is not the place to confront somebody. In front of a resident is not the place to confront somebody. If it can happen, behind closed doors is the way to do it. It doesn't mean you walk in and slam the door, because that has happened also. But if you can do it behind closed doors, you do it behind closed doors. It's not always ideal, but I think if you can attempt to approach the person and see if they're even in a space to have that conversation, right? The 7 to 3, 3 to 11 time shift difference is probably not the time to confront a nurse, right? They already have 1,000 things going on in that time frame, and that's when you want to talk about it. That might not be the best time. So timing matters. And it's always okay to say, is now a good time? And if not, when? Because just because I have an issue with something, you might not even know what I'm coming to you about. You're like, what? I don't even remember that happening. Right? So putting that time factor out there. So tone of voice, body language, environment, timing. Anything else you can think of if you're going to confront somebody?
Language. Don't make light of it, or, be so cool that you're swearing.
Right.
Just, it can be very demeaning, or take away from the topic.
Absolutely. Do you guys feel like you're good communicators?
For the most part.
Okay.
I always try to be, or tell you if something's going to be, or what's going to happen, or be on time is critical, and stuff.
So being really direct.
Yes, that's how I come, always
Okay.
have,
Okay.
I like to make the best of the time, keep it professional.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think everybody's a good communicator?
No.
Especially when you're talking, eye contact's very important too.
Oh, that's a good one.
These days,
Forgot that
even though
one.
electronics are taking over, you know, but still eye is important.
Yeah, that is important. I
Yeah.
forgot that one. Yep, absolutely. Why do you think some people are better communicators than others?
They've learned, or they've been taught. They've learned the wrong way.
And they've seen it.
They know what the ending is if you don't communicate the right way, and they know what it is, the prize is if you do communicate the right way, how it's not so complicating and
Yeah, because it often gets bigger in our heads than it actually is.
yeah.
How many of us have rehearsed the entire conflict in our head before we actually talk to anybody? Well, I'm going to say this, and they're going to say this, and I'm going to say this. And you got yourself all worked up, and none of that ever happens.
And maturity too. Because the way I communicated when I was 21 compared to 40-something is
Absolutely.
completely different. You know, I'm usually able to let stuff kind of roll off and not internalize it so much and be like, oh, okay, you know, here's the
Absolutely.
situation, this is what we have, what can we do to fix it, you know?
Right.
Let's meet in the middle.
I think
Like,
that's
this is
also a big
uncomfortable
thing.
for me.
I think that's
Yeah.
a big thing, to be honest. Because you get kids that are younger, and they're feisty. They just want to fight you and slap you and scream in your face. And I'll be 25, but I had to grow up a little faster, so I can communicate without wanting to punch someone in the face.
Right.
Right.
And you probably could do that a lot younger
Yeah.
than your peer group did, even in high school.
Yeah.
Right?
But I totally agree with
Right,
that.
like each time is a reflection.
Yeah, the older you get, the more you're just you're like,
You look
yeah,
back
no,
on it like,
I don't
wow.
want
It's
to deal
not
with
worth it,
that.
Sam.
It's
Yeah.
not worth
Absolutely.
it.
When you get to be in your
Oh,
40s,
I
it's
was a
just
little
not worth
cocky,
it.
wasn't I? Or, you
Yeah.
know, just look back on it like, what a fool.
It's like, why didn't I get punched in the face?
Yeah.
And you know, when you talk about that piece of reflection, because we all have something to learn in the context of a conflict. There's always something to learn. Whether it's tolerance, right, because people are different people. Whether it's acceptance that we might have to agree to disagree, put it to rest and keep it moving, right? Or we learn our own triggers. We all have certain things that trip our triggers. Right? And for a lot of people here, it's resident care. Right? So conflict will come when people feel like residents aren't getting what they need. Right? So that's okay. We just have to know that about ourselves. And we also, one of the other rules of thumb that I try to encourage people is to never take things personally. It might feel personal, but I promise you it's not. Because people are like, well, they did that to me, or they don't like me, and blah, blah, blah. And you know, maybe they don't like you, I don't know. But I do know that people always do what works for them. People aren't out to get you. People aren't out to hurt you. People are out to do whatever they feel they need for themselves. Period. It's just the way human beings operate. So if you cannot take it personally, that makes it a lot easier to have the conversation. You know, most people know I have a private practice outside of this part of my work, and so I work with all different people from like middle school up, couples, families, whatever. And anybody that comes into my office, whether it's the parents or it's the kid, and they, you know, their claim to fame is, well, we never fight in front of our kids. Or the adult who says, well, I never saw my parents fight. Well, I don't think that's normal.
Right.
Right?
How are you going to learn that conflict is normal?
Absolutely.
If you don't see it. You
Absolutely.
gotta see, like, the disagreement to the resolve, you know,
And
like,
that you
oh.
are okay.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we can be mad at each other and talk about it, and tomorrow we're fine. If you don't see that growing up, you don't know that. Right? So I understand where parents are coming from, and they're like, well, they don't fight in front of the kids. And I'm certainly not talking about the adult topics or the knockdown, drag-out domestic violence fighting, but I am talking about learning to work together. Right? Because everybody's different. Right? Everybody that shares space with anybody in their home knows that conflict happens. Right? I have a 14-year-old son who swears I'm always yelling. Right?
Do you play the game? Oh, you think I'm yelling? This is yelling.
Well, that's what I say to him. I was yelling, the whole neighborhood would know it. And I'm not yelling, but if I've repeated myself 12 times, right.
Yeah.
The 13th time is going to be a little louder. And when you say, why are you always yelling? A, it's not always. I'm sure it's not always. if you had responded the first 12 times I spoke to you, perhaps I wouldn't be ready to snap. He just looks at me like he didn't hear anything I said. So conflicts happen. It's normal. And it's okay. It's uncomfortable, but it's certainly okay. So, fair fight rules. There's lots and lots of them out there. I like to narrow it down to 3 because that seems to be a number most people can remember what all 3 of them are. So, 1 is no hitting below the belt. No name calling, no, nasty, edgy, rude, disrespectful stuff, no hitting below the belt. No damage to people or property. And the one that is the one most people remember but have the hardest time following is nothing over 7 days old. So if I haven't found a way to resolve something with you, if it's about you and I haven't found a way to resolve it in 7 days, well, it's not necessarily reasonable for me to come to you at that point. I need to figure that out. And that is a generic number, right? A week, it's just a generic number. But how many times in an argument somebody will say, well, remember back in the spring? Right? Well, remember last year when you did that? Okay. If I even remember what happened a year ago. And it's not fair fight. There's nothing anybody's going to do about something that happened 6 months or a year ago. And if I didn't bring it up then, that's my problem. It's not on you to fix it all that time later. It's not fair. Right? But we all do it. We all do it. I hear it here all the time. Anybody that's been here any amount of time can bring back incidents from 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years, 10 years ago. All right? So those are the 3 fair fight rules. They're not ideal all the time. I mean, you do the best you can to kind of live within that 7 days. And sometimes you give yourself a little bit of time because you're really pissed when it happens. Right? Like, or you're really hurt, or you're really bothered. Right? That's also not the time to confront somebody. You got to get your emotions in check. And maybe have some conversation with some other people, not in a gossip way, but in a, can you help me put this into words? I need to say this to somebody I work with, but I'm at a loss. Can you help me with that? So trying to get your thought process in order and the emotion out of the way. Because it's easier for people to hear you that way. So, if we have to learn communication growing up, some of us did, some of us didn't, with conflict, right? We have to learn how to communicate as well. What do you think is involved in active listening? Because that's the other part of communication, right? Is what I say and how I listen. So what pieces do you think are in active listening?
You need to validate what they're saying so that they know they're heard.
Okay.
You know, I think I take a lot of complaints on a regular basis, and where I got overwhelmed was at the Christmas party when I got so many compliments. Like, I didn't know, I'm so used to getting the complaints that I really felt emotional that we had so much good going on that the complaints just started to really bother me.
Sure.
And so I know when I take the complaints in that 90% of the families just need to be validated. They need to be heard and say, you absolutely have every right to feel that way.
Absolutely.
And I think that's like huge. It's important not to be like, no, it didn't happen like that, or
Defend yourself.
yeah, don't take that away from somebody if they're actually willing to step up and explain what's going on or confront the situation. You have to be open to that and hear it through and let them know, and then act on it. What's going to be your role? And I think that validation is the biggest part of
huge.
The communication.
It's huge. How do you know if someone's actively listening to you?
Their eye contact and their body posture.
Mm-hmm. The nonverbals.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How else might you know if someone's actively listening to you?
If they follow along with the conversation.
Sometimes you can tell them too, communicating very correctly. if they're really listening to you, or if they're just shrugging it off a shoulder
Like, uh-huh,
or back and
uh-huh.
forth, you know.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. Because they'll parrot back sometimes,
yes, yeah.
right? So it was when I said this that you got upset, right? So they will parrot it back
Yes, yeah.
to make sure everybody's clear, right? Instead of doing this, yep,
Exactly,
yep,
yes.
or having other conversations, right? People get distracted. Again, electronics, they're horrible.
And when I see other people, when you do communicate, and I think how disrespectful that is, because even with my boys, I'm real critical on that. You
Exactly.
know, be respectful, you know, that's my biggest thing, you know, I've preached, you know, from day one, you know,
Absolutely,
so.
absolutely. The stuff that we all
Yeah,
learned.
even though the rest of the world's doing it, you can still be, you're my boys, be respectful, you know.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's unfortunately become a time where you get noticed for
Right.
being the one that is doing that.
Exactly.
Where that kind of disrespect, rude
Yes.
behavior was just never tolerated
No.
at one time, and now it's like,
Right.
wow, your kid really is polite.
Yes. And you-
Right.
They don't think
'Cause I'll
they
tell
will get noticed, but they will be noticed by being polite and respectful.
Absolutely.
They will be noticed, no doubt, yes,
Absolutely. Yeah, and learning those rules.
yeah,
But you also notice the ones that aren't.
right.
Mhm.
Like, oh, okay, so Kelly's gone home now. I'm gonna invite her back. Like, you know,
Exactly.
like,
Yep.
wow.
Yeah, that's not the energy I want in my house. kind of thing.
Exactly.
Absolutely, absolutely. So some of those boundaries are important around our own health as well, right? Sometimes I can't have people at my house, or sometimes I need to be completely alone, right? Like, these are the things that I have to know about me to decide how to handle my day. And for me, a lot of it can be sleep.
Mhm.
If I didn't sleep well, I better be super cautious the next day. God, get a little grumpy. Sleep is serious business in my world, right? So I just have to know that about me. I'm going to have you take one of these pieces of paper, and then pass them around. There should be another. So active listening involves the nonverbals, eye contact. One more. Eye contact, nodding your head, parroting back, kind of rephrasing to make sure you're talking about the same things. That's all active listening. And they say that we spend about 65% of in our communication skills, we spend about 65% of the time listening. They say it's only about 20% talking, but we all know that's not always true. We all know plenty of people who spend way more time talking than listening. Right, so it's not straight across the board, but these are the kind of generic rules. So I'm going to read a list of words, and I don't want you to do anything but them at the moment. Just listen. Okay. Christmas, tree, stress, cookies, family, music, stress, winter, wrapping paper, Christmas cards, gifts, milk, crowds, stress, stockings, Hanukkah, lights, and joy. Okay. So that just you need to listen to those for 1 minute. It's also important that what we say is reflective in how we're behaving. Because I might believe what you say, but I will always believe what you do. So if I'm having a conflict with somebody that I've had before, and we've had a conversation about it, and we agreed how we were going to resolve it, and then the exact same scenario plays itself out again, there's going to be some trust eroded in that relationship. Right? Because what you said to me was, I hear you, I'm willing to work on this, and this is what I'm willing to do. And if you didn't do that, I need to be cautious going back to you and asking you to do something again. Right? Because I might believe what you say, but I will always believe what you do. So if I'm on the receiving end of a conflict and someone was upset with me, it's important for me not to say I'm going to do something that I'm not sure I can do. Right? So to say, well, I won't do that again. I hope. Right? Say, yup, I get it, that'll never happen again. It's a big tag to put on there. Right? So we need to be mindful of that if someone confronts us and we're trying to resolve it with them, we need to be mindful of what we say we're going to do and whether or not that truly is within our power. I'm sure that happens a lot for you. When families want you to do something and you can't just say, sure, I'll evict that resident or I'll move that resident. Like you can't commit to that. Right? Because then if they come back to you, they'll be like, well, last time I was here, you said you were going to do this, right? So we have to be cautious of that and not set ourselves up. Right? We all agree that we can work with people we're not friends with. Right? We're not all friends. We don't always all get along, even if we are friends. You don't always all get along. That's just the way it goes. It's a matter of respect and professional courtesy. Everybody's got a job to do. And me being grumpy or, edgy or unreasonable does nobody any good. Right? So I have to keep that in check. Because we're not all friends. And that's okay. Again, in my 20s, everybody was my friend. Right? Anybody I knew was my friend. At 46, maybe I can count them on one hand. Maybe. Right? So we just have to stay mindful of people being in different places. Write down any of the words from the list. And I'm not collecting them and they're not right or wrong. I'm just an example. And then we'll go over them. Friday too.
I know, right?
This exercise is different on a Monday than a Friday. For sure.
It must be the ones that are still on me, like that I pulled from it.
All right, I'm going to read them again, and then we'll talk a little bit about it. Christmas, tree, stress, cookies, family, music, stress, winter, wrapping paper, Christmas cards, gifts, milk, crowds, stress, stockings, Hanukkah, lights, and joy. How'd you guys do?
Seven. I got 7.
Stress if you count it 3 times.
Right.
Yeah, more than that, but.
I'm just looking for the. Anybody think of a word that should have been on the list but wasn't? Or write down a word that wasn't on the list?
I wrote down snow for some reason.
Okay.
That's what I got too.
Other. You put snow?
Yeah, and I
Okay.
thought instead of Christmas tree,
Okay.
combine the two,
Okay. Well, that's obviously an active listening exercise.
Right.
So they say to give you a minute to write down as many as you can remember, but I think that's too long. So 60% remember the first word. So how many people remembered Christmas? Okay. 75% would get the last word. Joy? Okay. 80% remember the word that was repeated 3 times. Stress. And 20% will write down a word that wasn't on the list, which in this particular exercise, my thought was Santa Claus.
Those have actually popped in my head, and I'm like, wait, is it
Funny?
snow?
Which totally wasn't on the list, but you can see how your brain will put it all together.
Right.
Right? So that's just an example of the fact that listening isn't a given. Right? Because one of the adult skills that we've all had to learn is to tune people out. right? I mean, it's an adult skill, right? We learn that. So we have to know when to turn that on or off, right? You don't want to, sorry, chewed you out, just for a minute. Through that whole conflict, I chewed you right out. Right, so we just have to stay mindful of that as well. One other thing to think about with conflict resolution, and this is just my personal opinion, you certainly can argue it both ways. How many people believe you need both parties to resolve a conflict?
You kind of do.
I don't think that it's always going to be a fair cut like that, because the conflict may be coming from one side and the other person is the resolve, you know. So I think that would be an unfair statement to say that you need both parties. I think you just need to hear it and be open to that there is conflict, even if you can't fix it or resolve.
Okay. I personally don't believe you need both parties. And the only reason I say that is because sometimes we're just different people. I think you can always find some middle ground with things like the way we speak to one another. Right? I think you can have some conversation about, I need you not to yell at me, or I need you not to use certain words, right? But we don't have to agree on the particular point of contention for somebody to leave it alone, right? There's always going to be people that are looking for conflict. They're everywhere in every environment, right? My favorite little meme, there are some people who seem angry and continuously looking for conflict. Walk away. The battle they are fighting isn't with you, it is within themselves. Right? So they're there. But those are not people that you're going to have a conversation with and feel like, oh, great, we're on the same page. This is good. I trust this will never happen again, and we're moving forward. Those aren't those people, for whatever reason. Right? So in a conflict, it's important to know what your need is going in. I need to be heard. I need to feel understood. I just need to let you know how this felt for me. You have to know what your needs are going in, because I think that has to be communicated. I don't need you to like me. I don't need you to agree with me. I just need to let you know this is how I felt in this situation. Right? And you know, like you were saying, conflict might not even be on somebody's radar. I might have come across as somebody a certain way that tripped their trigger, and I just went on not even recognizing that I did that. Right? So that doesn't necessarily need two people, because it wasn't an issue for me. I didn't feel conflictual around it. But I need to listen to what somebody says. You know, the last thing we want to say to somebody when they tell us something about, well, when this happened, I felt this way, is, well, I don't know why you'd feel that way. You shouldn't feel that way. Well, I do. Sorry. People say that all the time. Well, you just shouldn't think that way. Right. Yeah, just don't worry about it. Right. I'll get right on that, because I didn't think of that. So it's just about being mindful of our side of the street, knowing when you're truly at an impasse, right? Because sometimes it's just going to be that. We can work together, we can professionally respect each other, but this particular issue we're not going to see eye to eye on. And we do see that because we work in a multidisciplinary environment. Nursing doesn't see things the same as administration, or social work, or activities, or households, or dietary. Right? We have to accept that where people are at are sometimes just where they're at because of who they are and what they do here. I don't know why nursing does what they do, because I'm not a nurse. But if you tell me this is why we do it, I will believe you. But it's not up to me to say, well, you shouldn't do it that way. What the hell do I know? I'm a social worker. Well, I can't know the job I'm supposed to do. I can't. But in a multidisciplinary setting, it happens all the time. You heard it in the in-service back in July. where CNAs or households will call down to the kitchen and start ripping somebody's head off. Well, do you even know what's going on in the kitchen? Right. So we're all human, and we have to allow for that. But I hope that people feel empowered, whether it's within their own unit or department or whatever. I hope you have somebody you can go to if something conflictual happens and it's weighing on you. If you're on the fence, but it's still bothering you 24 hours later, I think it's an issue. And that's just my opinion, again, generic time frame. All right, if I can walk out the door and it's done, I don't need to talk about it. But if I lose sleep, or I come into work the next day and I see you and I'm not well, I need to figure that out. Right. So that's kind of the overview of conflict resolution and communication. Any thoughts, feelings, concerns, comments, complaints, suggestions, anything?
I like the part you talked about different departments, because that comes up a lot.
Of course.
You know, a lot of quality concerns come in, and, you know, the nurse was having me do this, but she's just passing pills, why couldn't she do it? And so it's just respecting, you know, people's, like, boundaries. They have a job to do as well, and we see a lot of that. So
Of
sometimes,
course.
but I always try to talk to the person, like, okay, if you were doing that, or that's what you observed, why do you think she was doing that?
Right.
Well, because she's on a timed job, you know.
Right.
She could stop and help you, but then are you going to be able to do her job?
Right.
So when I think sometimes it's like the light bulb moment, you can see it happen.
And sometimes a third party might be helpful in a conflict.
Mhm.
It depends on the people that are having the conflict. I mean, and it's your own comfort level, because sometimes, depending on, like, if there's a power differential, so like if you're trying to confront a supervisor, you might want that third party there just so you feel safe in how it goes down. So hopefully there are people here who can play that role for people. I'm always a resource for folks. You know, I'm for the most part here on Fridays, but if you give me enough opportunity, I can be available. So if conflicts come up and you feel like one-on-one probably isn't the best situation, it's certainly okay to ask somebody to sit in there, but the mediator has to be objective. Right? So the person that you went to complain about the person you're upset with might not be the best mediator. So just things to be mindful of. And like we talked about back in July, if you have a relationship with somebody and something is off with them, and they're snapping at somebody, and you feel like that's not normal for them, you could probably avoid some conflict by just walking up to them and asking them if they're okay. You seem off. Things okay. Do you need anything? Because that just gives that person that second to check in. And you may help that person avoid other conflicts throughout the rest of their day. So rather than reacting to people, sometimes we need to connect with them. Especially if you know them well and you know they're out of sorts. So if there's nothing else,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you for coming.